Is the Strategist Skill OP? Well, the player Bethesda was able to use it on their build Skyrim to sell 3.5 million units in 48 hours, while the player From Software was able to use it on their Dark Souls build to sell 1.19 million in 6 months. However, both are considered smashing successes. Why? Well, because of strategy. Strategy is the step before min-maxing your build, and good strategy has 2 pieces. Number 1, trade-offs, and number 2, fit. Let's say you're playing in the virtual Skyrim server, and you're going to be an archer build. You will have pros and cons from choosing bows. Pro, you will be very far away when you're shooting at opponents, and thus you can be safe and not worry about them coming up to hit you. Cons, if they find you and run up to hit you, you're not really able to fight back very easily. This is your trade-off. You give up the ability to fight in melee range in order to be able to fight in a long range. Now, if you find yourself in a situation where you're like, oh no, I'm being attacked up close, and you switch to using a sword of some melee type, well then what was the point of using a bow? If you put points in both these things, then you're kind of splitting your forces. If your opponents were going to be defeated by the bow before they got to you, you'd never need the sword. But if they're not doing so, then why use the bow at all? Stick with the sword and then you'll do more damage over time. This is where the benefits of fit comes in. What issues are there with a bow, and what bonuses are there with a bow? Well, the bow is doing well at long distance, but the problem is when people see you and run up to you. So why don't you try sneak? Sneak is the ability for you to hide. They won't know where you are, so when you fire an arrow at them, they don't know where it came from. Thus, you can continue to fire more arrows before the opponents know where you are, and thus you solve the problem of them running up to attack you, because now they just don't know where you are. And you also add bonus value to it, because now you just get more arrows into the opponent from afar, and they never get close. Something like alchemy works really well for this too. Poison damage will increase the amount of DPS that you're able to put out. Something like Fury can force enemies to fight each other, and then there's a myriad of other sort of spell-like substances that exists in the alchemy skill tree. A fit means synergy. A good fit strengthens the pros and minimizes the cons in a strategy. In the business server, the player From Software used strategy on their build Dark Souls, and they did it in November 2011 at the exact same time as the player Bethesda was putting out their build of Skyrim. Skyrim had sold 3.5 million units in 48 hours, while Dark Souls had sold 1.19 million in 6 months. How could the Dark Souls build be compared to the Skyrim build and have them both be successes? Well, this has to do with strategy and fit. Skyrim wanted to be a massive open world with cities, caves, and secrets in between, while Dark Souls doesn't have a world map. It's really small, very compact. Skyrim has tons of quest lines, have Warrior, Main Quest, Thieves Quest, Assassin's Quest, Daedric Quest, all of them have voice acting. In Dark Souls there was like 5 NPCs who talk, and they don't talk much. Skyrim has multiple difficulties to allow anyone to feel like the Dragonborn, while Dark Souls is like, if you can't play R1 difficulty, bing! There's beautiful music in Skyrim from Jeremy Soule. There's not a lot of music in Dark Souls. It's mostly atmosphere. The Dark Souls build didn't want to be the Skyrim build. With less voiceovers, it minimized the cost that it took to make the game. With less quest lines, it also made it so there's less quality assurance. It was easier to focus on just the main lines and make sure that those are the best. Having a smaller world allowed them to make that small world more interesting. Also, without a world map, it made it so that players weren't going to have a hard time wrapping their head around this smaller world. On top of this, it makes the world more mysterious and scary when you don't have a world map, which fits really well with the whole Dark Souls, the end of the Fantasyland. With less NPCs in the world and a difficulty that was so spiked compared to anything else before, it made the player feel like they were unimportant. They weren't the hero. They were just a citizen doing their best. And that was an experience that was helped made by having less characters, a smaller world, but more mysterious. One with a crazy hard difficulty, no real tutorial, and no real sets of music. Because of this, the Dark Souls build hit a niche set of gamers who wanted to be challenged and not a lot of them were receiving games made just for them. The game was made cheaper, being less VO and less quality assurance required. Also, the build of the build was also cheaper. The actual graphics were old and not that impressive, but they were understood, so it was cheaper to get the skill in order to make it. This build strategy was to be profitable in a smaller market. They needed to sell less in order to be just as profitable as something like Skyrim. Whether or not they're actually as profitable as the Skyrim build, I am unsure. However, they were still very successful as the fact that we see it everywhere and it kind of started a genre. So the player Bethesda made an incredible build. However, they would be really hard pressed to make a Dark Souls build. Bethesda needs more treasure in order to maintain its guild dues. It's a much bigger guild, and thus they have to go for a larger audience of other players. So if you were going to try to compete with the From Software player, you would have to copy their method exactly, their build entirely. You'd have to make it less expensive, you'd have to make it more desolate, you'd have to make it something that is just as tough and hard, and then you're just sort of another Dark Souls build. So that is why the strategy skill is so strong. With it, you're able to be more successful in a niche direction or in a grand direction and solve issues that would normally seem problematic. Good luck speccing into it. It's a pretty quality one. So if there's any other skills or perks that you want to learn, let me know in comments down below. I might make a guide about them. See you.
To leave the undead asylum in pilgrimage.